In the last activity, many of you, I hope, participated in determining what percentage of your income, of your disposable income, goes for food. The latest that we could find on this percent of household expenditures for food show roughly 7 to 10 or 12% for the US, Canada, the UK, and Australia, and rather higher numbers for a number of other countries. You can just take a scan of this. It's not meant to be exhaustive, but it certainly gives an idea that food is clearly extremely important part of the menu for individuals of how much money they're going to spend. And it's really not so much of the income in North America and Australia and the UK. One other comment to make before we get into a little bit of the science part, before we then stop for this lesson for today, is that we would really emphasize that Google or any of the other search engines, but Google is certainly taken over as a noun and a verb and maybe even an adjective. It's very good for question answering, but you need to be careful about what source that you're looking at. If they're selling something, be wary. But if it's a government site, you can probably count on it being a pretty good one. And so if you're just not sure about a particular word or so, just put it into the Google search engine. Most of you probably do this anyway. And then you won't get caught up asking us questions, and this is just to make a little fun of Bart Simpson. He was told not to ask dumb questions unless he checked with Google, but that's really what the point is, and we don't tell that to the students. We just say, look, take a look at it before you come and make an appointment to talk to us, because you can probably find the answer on your very own. Well, I want to touch a little bit on history and then move into where we're going to be starting in the next several presentations. Historically, people have looked at food in many different ways. Renoir painted these vegetables in a beautiful painting. Here's another Renoir painting of onions that was taken from the museum in Williamstown, Massachusetts, the Clark Museum, a beautiful painting. And one of my own, which we happened to buy, my wife and I, by Maureen Burke of New Brunswick. This painting is only about this high, but it has an enormous number of details just because people were interested in food, or this being, of course, an unusual mushroom. Well, when you go back a couple hundred years, you find people who were starting to work with food, trying to understand what food was all about. Antoine Lavoisier was a famous chemist. He did have his head removed from himself because he was a tax collector at the time of the French Revolution. But he did some very good science. This painting, I have to point out, is in the Metropolitan Museum in New York City. It's a very large painting, and it's worth the trip if you happen to be in New York to see this. This is a photograph I took. Just the details of that globe that's on the bottom right-hand part of the painting is shown here. Here's an even greater detail. And that particular flask, whether it's the very same flask or one very similar to it, was used in some of Lavoisier's experiments. He was able to determine how much CO2 was produced by eating. You see on the right-hand side, this person is blowing into a tube. There's likely the kind of flask that was shown in that painting. And they were able to determine how much CO2 was in that individual over a period of time, of course, being produced by the oxidation of his food. Many experiments were carried out, some of them causing the individuals to stay in one place for a long time while they ate their food. Their weight changed, and then their weight reduced by their elimination of the waste products of food, but they were able to show that a conservation of mass was indeed demonstrated. So that was the beginning, a couple hundred years ago, doing some very good science. And we're going to emphasize, I think, some good science as we talk about what people have eaten over the decades, over the millennia, the last 150 years. This is an unusual painting by Van Gogh in his early days in Holland called The Potato Eaters, and people were only eating potatoes and having coffee. That was the essential meal, maybe 2, maybe 3 times a day. Van Gogh, before he got into his movement when he went to France, painted some more drab-like pictures but of what people were doing, women minding the nets in the dunes, 1882. Well, People 100 years ago were sometimes searching for food. This was, and I showed this as a woodcut from the time of around the early 1900s or even before. This is a bit after that, but this has been a problem and a situation that is widely seen. At least we wish it weren't so widely seen, and even today young children sometimes have to do this. Through the last 100 years in North America, there have been some reforms that have taken place. In the 1910s and 20s, plaster of Paris was added to the flour to make loaves of bread heavier, and therefore seemingly to be worth more and to be sold. And that's what plaster of Paris is, nothing more than calcium sulfate. And so trickery was taking place. And another important movement which caused in the early 1900s there to be laws in the United States which spread to a number of other countries. The Jungle by Upton Sinclair was made into a movie, and it was of course a book, and the comment that's being made, which is a little hard to see, is, "Quick, Yorgos, we must recover the body from the lard vat." Well, they didn't put people in there, but it was very dangerous to work in Chicago in the meatpacking industry, and sometimes individuals, unfortunately, who were working there fell into the lard vat, and they were not always removed immediately. So they're trying to cover up a little bit. Well, the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 helped to change a lot of this malpractice that was taking place with food. It's gotten better and better. It was illustrated in the 100th year anniversary in 2006 by this stamp. And today, there is in fact enough food to feed the entire planet. Very carefully constructed food areas, whether they be a plain in central part of the United States or Canada, or whether they be the inventive use of tier kinds of production of food by on this volcano, this extinct volcano in Madagascar, or whether it's outside of Los Angeles in a massive field. There's plenty of food for everybody, but the problem is twofold. One is food spoils. The second one is that it can't be distributed in an effective kind of way. And the other problem is that a third or more of the crops are in fact destroyed by insects. This is the famous cabbage looper, which simply consumes the cabbage leaves. So there are problems with food. There are problems with food with respect to how good that food is, and is it being presented properly in restaurants or in cafeterias where there are younger children consuming food. Is it nutritious? My colleagues and I gave a presentation some years ago at a high school, and I took a picture of the menu at that time, and all you see is French fries, hamburger, hot dog, soft drinks, and they're calling it eating, healthier eating. We kind of don't think that's quite the right menu to have. That's years ago. That's often been improved in many schools, but in some it hasn't been so much improved.